Welcome aboard, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome to the program. Michael D. Shaw is my guest, as is our habit on Thursday live here at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mike, how are you?
Hey, just great. We have ourselves a new pope,
Indeed.
an American.
Yes. And it's very exciting. I think that it's a huge, elating experience because the office of Pope is the oldest religious office in history. It's been perpetually inhabited by a pope since the beginning of the Kingdom of Rome, which, according to the Talmud, began at the same time as the Empire of Solomon. So we're talking about, and I think there's no reason to not believe that historically, even though the early centuries of the Kingdom of Rome are somewhat obscure. Goes back to Romulus and Remus. But nevertheless, when the city of Rome was established, the office of Pontifex Maximus was established, which was the office that would be in charge of religion, faith. Back then it was pagan, but nevertheless, the office became Christian when I think long before Constantine. It became Christian at probably, according to Catholic traditions, immediately after Jesus gave
It goes back to Peter.
The mitre to Peter, exactly, St. Peter's chair, the fisherman's chair. I think Protestants take a slightly different view, but nevertheless, it is an extremely important and august office for the entire world, not just the Catholic Church, which of course is the largest religion in the world in terms of influence and its spread. And I also would say its grandeur. There's nothing more incredible or beautiful than the aura that the Catholics create. I don't think there's anything quite like that. There's no one that comes anywhere near it. It's something that they've been practicing for many centuries, if not millennia, in terms of how to create this sort of spiritual look. I guess I don't know how to describe it, but it's an incredible thing, and it was on full display. It's St. Peter's Basilica is an incredible example of it. I've been there. I actually toured it with my daughter after she graduated college. She went on a European tour, and she was a history major. And toward the end of her tour, mostly in Germany because that was her area of study,
right.
But toward the end of her tour, she invited me to join her. And we met up in Salzburg, which is a fascinating city. Yeah. And then we went to Venice. And between Venice, we stopped in Ljubljana, which is the capital of Slovenia. What a great country that is. Such energy. I think they're still celebrating the fall of communism, but there was just the parties and the street vendors and the place was buzzing. And of course, St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, I think, is probably the most beautiful, the most artistically incredible building in the world. It's just amazing.
It's certainly right up there.
Oh yeah, to see it, it's just the intricacy of it and the way these incredible, intricate biblical scenes created on the different ceilings, and the whole, as I was saying, the aura of it is it's awe-inspiring. It's just so awesome. And then we went to Rome, and we went to the Vatican, and we went to a lot of other sites. We went to the Jewish Quarter. We saw everything. We both are history buffs, so we spent a lot of time in the Forum and looking at Roman history. It was really a fantastic trip. But to get back to our subject, this is a great and glorious event, no matter who the Pope is. Now, we don't know that much about this particular Pope, but I feel reluctant to in any way criticize because it is all happening right now. It's all unfolding. And I think that it's probably not actually, I don't know, in good taste to get into questions of whether or not he's conservative or liberal.
Well, that's a good point. There are people in the media that immediately began to speculate. Although it did come out that apparently Steve Bannon had predicted this guy over a week ago.
Oh, did he?
But We don't know a lot about him. Certainly south side of Chicago.
Yeah,
Good Catholic boy, obviously.
sure.
Spent a great deal of time out of the country. He's a missionary type individual.
Right. Didn't he spend something like 30 years in Peru?
Yeah, in Peru. And at this point, I think I could say, and hopefully most people agree, that I'd rather have a missionary type guy than a bureaucrat. Although
Yes.
there have been some decent popes that were bureaucrats. And let's face it, this guy polished his resume in a way to get noticed. Now, is he going to end up being as liberal as Francis? I don't think so, but maybe he
Right.
had to check off some boxes to kind of get noticed. But we're going to see. It's got to unfold. You can speculate all day long, but
and I don't think that just by the little bit that we know, I don't think he will be as liberal as Francis because he's American,
yeah.
right? I mean, Francis is one of these kind of exotic European or Argentinian figures that get into very radical politics. I mean, they say he was a Peronista, but putting that aside, I think that here's a guy who grew up, as you say, in Chicago. He went to Villanova, which I think is a moderate Catholic university, a very scholarly.
It was good old Father Bob when he was in Chicago. So
yeah, and he's a kind of he has a very American quality about him. I mean, just his appearance, his language. I mean, he just, and for that reason alone, yeah, he might be liberalish, left of center, but he's kind of more moderate than maybe somebody from a European country or even from an Asian or African country. And I think that he also his expertise is law, Catholic law, canon law,
right.
and he has several degrees in it. And I think that's interesting. He's certainly somebody who has some intellect. He's got probably a good bit of scholarship involved, and a good deal of understanding on the history and the intricacies of the church, which I think that.
Wasn't he a math major at Villanova?
Oh, was he? That's good.
I believe so. So he is what you and I call one of these smart guys.
Yeah.
And
he's also a polyglot in that he is fluent in 7 languages. I think and he's very fluent in Italian and French, Spanish, Portuguese, English, and Latin.
His Latin wasn't too bad.
Okay, well, that's important, I would think, for a pope.
Well, I mean, it was interesting because, when you get to that level of the church, you got to have some knowledge of Latin, of course. But he seemed to be rattling it off pretty well.
Right. Well, that's impressive.
And I'm told that what happens, because I did know a priest that worked in the Vatican, was kind of friendly with him, and he said that the way they tell the real guys from the pretenders is you start walking around the Vatican and they start telling you Latin jokes. And as everybody knows, the most difficult thing in a foreign language is jokes, because it involves understanding the culture and the intricacies of the words and nuances and so on. And I remember, I tell people this, my old company used to do a fair amount of business in Mexico. And I was pretty good in Spanish at that point. But the problem was, you go to the bar, the guys would tell these jokes. I understood the story of the joke, but I had no idea why it was funny.
Right.
And so they're laughing, and it just sounded to me like they're telling some dumb story. It wasn't funny at all, but obviously I didn't see the cultural implications of what all that meant. So
but apparently he does. So that says a lot. If he can banter in Latin, that shows a very well-developed mind and somebody that's very eminently qualified to understand Catholic doctrine, because probably a lot of it is in Latin, I would guess, as least historically.
Well, that's the official language of the church, for really the reason that the language isn't changing, except for they will add, obviously they didn't have words like computer and whatnot, cell phone. So they're going to make up terms in Latin to connote that, but the language otherwise doesn't change. And what tends to change, which last time it occurred, I think was in 2011, well, they'll change the translation into English of the liturgy. They haven't changed the Latin.
Well, that's why it's valuable. I mean, that's why Hebrew is valuable in Judaism.
Yeah.
That's why Sanskrit is valuable in Hinduism. It is, they say it's a dead language. I mean, I suppose, in that it's not a conversational language, although Hebrew is now, but it's a language that has retained its etymological meaning. You can go to the root of the word and find out what's meant. You can't twist it around. You can't manipulate it. It has a meaning, and it's definable. And there's a lot of value in that, especially when you're dealing with religion and law.
Yeah.
So, but I want to bring up one little wrinkle in my analysis, and this is something that I am completely flying on the seat of my pants over this, and I'm not claiming that this means anything other than just what I'm saying it is. And I'll just say it. I'm just going to spill the beans. Robert Prevost is his name.
Yes.
Now, the Prevost family goes way back to, according to the Tin Hat crowd. Again, I'm not saying it goes back to the Venetian dark families. It goes way back. The Prevosts were very involved. They were from Geneva. It was a German Swiss family, and they were very involved in trying to stop the American Revolution. The George Prevost became Governor General of Canada during the War of 1812. His father was involved in the Loyalist movement, the Tory movement in the United States, in the American colonies during the American Revolution. They had their hand in a lot of stuff that you might call the deep state of the day. Again, I'm not saying he's even related to the Prevosts, and even if he were, but there were several families: the Prevosts, the Malays, the St. Clairs. These were families that go way back. They even say to possibly Roman times. And they were sort of the establishment that were the equivalent of a deep state today. Again, I'm not suggesting that he is of that ilk, but that is his last name. And, Steve Bannon made reference to, he was arguing, I didn't hear him predict Pope Leo, but I did hear him debating with Jack Posobiec and saying that who's there reporting for, the war room. And he was saying, look, they're not going to get a conservative pope. Even if they do, it's not going to matter because the Vatican is completely captured by the deep state. Now, I'm not saying he's right, but
there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, there were 130 cardinals, 108 of whom were appointed by Francis.
Well,
I would imagine there was some liberal sentiment, and in the hierarchy of the church, let's face it, most of them are liberal.
Right.
A lot of the conservatives keep their mouths shut. There's some that get to a certain age where they don't care anymore. I mean, the pastor when we lived in Virginia was of a certain age, a little younger than me, but he knew that, hey, you know what? He's not going to go any higher in this gig. So he was free to speak his mind.
But in order to get up the ranks, you have to have a bit of a liberal pedigree.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Strickland in Texas, as far as he got, fairly conservative until he got kicked out. But it has been the case, unfortunately, for a while, that if you were conservative in the church, there was a glass ceiling, you might say. For example, in Chicago, where the current pope came from, the cardinal there, super liberal.
Wasn't it McCarrick?
Supich.
Okay.
And the auxiliary bishops in Chicago are more conservative, but the point being, that's why they stopped. They're not going to get any higher than that. Jose Garcia in my diocese, which is the biggest in the country, LA, is considered conservative by Vatican standards. I wouldn't call him a flaming conservative, but he didn't get to be a cardinal, which is the first time in a long, long time where the Archbishop of LA didn't become a cardinal.
And I think that didn't Francis demote a few people, including Vigano, I believe.
Yeah. Well, Vigano was excommunicated, supposedly.
Oh, was he? Wow. So, there was a bit of a purge of more conservative people, although it seems like some of the African cardinals, like Sarah, were real conservatives. And there was talk and there was a buzz around him being the next pope.
Well, I mean, I almost think that's his mission, and not personally him, but he's always the guy that everybody wants, this conservative pope. And, well, it's not going to be him because Leo is 69 years old. Sarah's older than that.
Right.
So,
and 69 is pretty young for a pope.
Yeah.
I mean, he'll probably be there. He'll be like John Paul II. He'll be there right up till the bitter end. He'll be like 30 years, 40 years. I don't know.
So, from a Catholic point of view, the politics are secondary to, how's the guy on doctrine, where Francis was pretty bad. Well,
we know, I mean, from points of view, he was into social media. He was posting and reposting.
Well, he's posting a lot of anti-Trump stuff.
That's what I'm saying, anti-Trump, and also directly criticizing comments made by J.D. Vance in terms of he didn't like his stand on sovereignty, didn't like his stand on borders and on immigration. That's worrisome for me. I mean, looking from the outside here, I mean, I understand that. I heard a caller to Jeff Cooner, who's a talk show host here, who's by the way a very conservative Catholic also, and he said that this guy said, "Look, my priest every Sunday does sermons on the importance of open borders, and we have to have and Catholic Charities was the #1 organization in the United States promoting open borders and literally engaging in activities of helping people come across the border." And they kind of, I think I mentioned that this Jewish organization, CIUS, there was somebody that spoke about that at my synagogue. And she said, look, Catholic Charities is our boss. We're just, we do what they say. And same thing with this Lutheran group, that they all look to Catholic Charities. It was the big one. In terms, and they've got the big money also, apparently, which has been cut off by this government right now. But they were into open borders. This was their political position.
Well, the Catholic Charity has been terrible for quite a while. As you know, they were aligned with Saul Alinsky back in the day.
Right.
And unfortunately, there are people who are practicing Catholics that were given the misconception early on that the Catholic Church is some sort of social justice, social welfare organization.
Right.
Apparently as its primary mission, and that's not what it's about. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with charity.
Right.
But the mission is to save souls. And when they get completely involved in left-wing activities, for me, it's under false pretenses. And there are some parishes, including 2 that I've been members of, that don't even collect for Catholic Charities anymore because they know that the real Catholics in the parish just don't buy that. So
and maybe, yeah, I don't know, maybe they're becoming aware of that because there's also, and my source on this again is Jack Posobiec, and he's active. I mean, who knows? I'm not saying he's unimpeachable, but he says that there's a huge upsurge of interest amongst like conservatives in Catholicism, conservative Catholics all over the world, and including in the United States, particularly younger people who are wanting to have a more conservative church. He was convinced that that would lead to a more conservative pope. Bannon kind of slapped that down. He says, no, that's not going to happen. It didn't happen. But is there a surge of conservative?
well, remember these surges. Yes, there is, but these take a while. I mean, the entire culture in the Vatican isn't going to change in one generation.
Right.
So if you're, and use the example of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. Here was a guy who spent his entire life polishing his resume, right? If you want to get to be Pope, you're not going to be a quiet guy, and you're not going to be some deeply spiritual parish type individual. You're going to be involved in the bureaucracy. You have to be. How else is someone going to hear about you?
The question is, are you willing to compromise to get there? I mean, we could look at people who rise to high office in this country, in the secular country, who will certainly have come, I mean, obviously those notorious recently is the Clintons, right? I mean, they sell anything to get power.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and then consider you look at a guy like Padre Pio, who was canonized a number of years ago.
Yes,
this guy was a very devout local parish priest, and to be honest, I'm not sure how good a pope a guy like that would have made. Okay,
right.
You've got to be a bit of a manager and a bureaucrat, and
you also have to have a little more than a drop of charisma. You're leading the flock. It's sort of like, I mean, I've talked about this before. George Washington understood that. He understood that as the first president of the United States, he was going to set the tone for every president to come after him, which meant how he carried himself on his horse, how he wore his suit, how he combed his hair, how he entered the room, how he was addressed. The first year of his presidency, they spent a lot of debate. What should we call you? I mean, Mr. President, El Presidente, they had all these different names. And eventually, it was decided, and what do we call the First Lady? And, there was all this kind of establishing image and marketing, frankly, that went into that, and he commanded the room. When he walked in the room, you knew he was there. He had like a commanding presence. I mean, John Adams talks about this in his diary when he first met Washington. And one of the reasons Adams got as far as he did, he knew how to polish an apple, was that he said, he's here, Washington. He must be the general immediately. We have to appoint him. And he kind of like hooked onto the wagon there of, what he saw as the future. I mean, so there's a lot of, not that he wasn't absolutely a brilliant man. He was incredible figure if you read his writing.
I mean, and in the case of the church, it's even more so. All right. You have this important spiritual mission, but then you're running this gigantic organization. All right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So Mother Teresa would not be a very good pope.
Right.
And so you've got to get people that have some sort of managerial talent, know how to play the politics. And it seems almost incompatible, and might be, with being a deeply spiritual leader. And that's been the conflict since day one, probably.
Right. But I think that there are some of them who have managed that very well. I think that John Paul II was one of those. And he was both spiritual and he was, knew how to work the room.
Well, he had a sort of an influence and a presence, because remember, he came out of Poland and he was able to whatever extent, defy the Ruskies
Right.
to get where he was. Um, so you're going to have this conflict between the administrators and the guys in the parishes, uh, and
But I just hope that they might pull things a little bit back in terms of some of the more radical aspects of Francis's papacy. And again, I feel like it's not my business. I don't have any direct skin in the game. I don't have like a child in a Catholic school, but I sympathize with people who do. And I sympathize overall with the importance of the church's voice in the world, which I hope will be a little bit less radical. I mean, Francis was making very, I think, statements that seem to be throwing out all of the traditions.
well,
And
that's exactly right, and that's
if they
why,
do that, then it's going to become like a Protestant church.
yeah, well, that's why I said, I think in the last show, that the media's attitude toward this is the only good Catholic is a bad Catholic.
Mm.
Right? So um, we'll just have to see what happens, because people have been fooled before, and some of the greatest popes,
Mm-hmm.
saintly popes, surprised everybody.
I'm watching this clips of this movie that was made about the papacy. It stars Jude Law, the actor. I don't know. Have you seen this?
What was the name of the movie?
I don't even know, but it comes up on my TikTok and they show clips of it, and it's pretty good in that he was kind of they couldn't decide who to pick. He was a young dark horse candidate, and they put him in there because they thought he was like a tool of these older cardinals who kind of ran the show. But the minute he got in there, he's like, "Hey, I don't answer to you guys. I answer to God. I'm not listening to you guys. And by the way, I'm sending you to Alaska." He became like, he really took control. And there's some great dialogue there about him handling different situations, and he's doing it. I'm doing it my way. I'm doing it what I think is best for the church. I don't care what about these intrigues. And they're like, yes, but Papa, you have to. And then there's people plotting to do stuff to him. He says, you're out. I'm sending you to Madagascar. It's like he really. I mean, but it's I don't know. Maybe this guy will be like that. The minute you step into that office, the minute you step into the St. Peter's, the fisherman's shoes, I don't know what they say, right? The fisherman's chair, he might really say, hey, this is a new day, This is what I've always wanted to do.
Well, what I was really hoping is that, okay, you played the game, you were able to get to this position, and as you say, now maybe I'm going to do what's right.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I think that's what Trump's all about.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not beholden to anybody. He made his money. He's older. He's been famous for 30 years. He doesn't have anything to prove. I mean, he's like, I want to do something. I want to give something back to my country. I really believe that. I mean, sure, there's a little bit of he takes to troll people, and he's all. I mean, he's certainly not a perfect person, but he's quite sincere. You need somebody like that. He's not owned by anybody. So I think that's the question about this guy. And even if he were a tool of somebody, once you're in that office, that's such an incredible, powerful office that, he doesn't seem to me to be, he seems to me to be a rather strong guy. He doesn't seem to be, I didn't think much of like Benedict. He seemed weaker, in terms of his convictions and, willing to play ball. But this guy seems like, hey, he could be like Jude Law in that movie. I don't know. I hope so. That would be amazing.
Time will tell, right?
Yes, but it's very interesting. It's very exciting. And I think that the whole world has a stake in just hoping and even praying that things go right and that he sets the ship of state at the Vatican in the right direction. So,
Indeed.
so what else is going on?
Oh man.
Kind of took the wind out of everything else.
Yeah, yeah, that was, and it was a fairly quick.
Yeah, they didn't waste any time. I think it was done within 24 hours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They weren't screwing around.
No, I mean, it'd be interesting to find out what was going on behind that door, but that's of course
I mean,
confidential.
some of these things took 11, 12 votes
Yeah,
to get it done. So
I was expecting it to be like the movie The Conclave. Did you see it?
you mean with the transgender person
Yes.
getting in? Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's just a that's Nobel, that's not Nobel, that's Oscar bait. They wanted to get an Oscar, so they had to do something for the change agents. But the thing that was interesting was the intrigue and all of a sudden they got some dirt on this Pope, this guy, you secretly have a wife with a child, and
yeah.
then this other thing, and then you had the guy come in and he was like trying to bully people. And look, when there's a position like that with that kind of power, there's going to be some of that. This is a huge, there's going to be people who are going to start to, try to cut a few corners to get there. They're going to try to grab the brass ring.
Yeah, well, this isn't like when Francis was elected with the whole McCarrick mafia behind it. And one of the things that Vigano got in trouble for was suggesting that it was really an illicit conclave that brought Francis in,
right?
Because there was just too much dirty money with McCarrick and so on. And it wasn't only that; it was the fact that Benedict wanted to kick McCarrick out, and he was reinstated by Francis, and so it was not a happy situation.
He seemed very corrupt. Plus, he wasn't involved in some of the pedophile stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a very bad guy. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but that represents some of the rot that's part of this. I mean, I hope that this Leo is not connected to any of that. I don't think he is.
No, there's some incident apparently in Peru where they had some pedophile priest, and it wasn't called Leo back then, but so the Prevost wanted the civil authorities to take care of it.
Okay.
I think it's probably better.
That's good.
It is being interpreted by some as, well, they were trying to shield this guy.
No, that's actually trying to, bring him to justice.
Yeah, rather than, pull a Roger Mahoney and keep moving the guy from one parish to another.
Or Cardinal Law, he was about to be arrested in Boston.
Yeah.
And somebody tipped him off and he skipped town.
Yeah.
Spent the rest of his life on the Vatican property. And he would not go off of it. I mean, he was involved with some pretty hairy stuff.
No, there's an unfortunate tradition of that going back to Spellman in New York and probably before that. So,
well, yeah, I mean, but the thing is, it got to a point where they were like, just, I mean, it was really, really corrupt. At least if you believe.
Well, some say, I read a book about this. I don't know how accurate it is, that all this rot in the church was brought in by Stalin. They got these known homosexuals to go into the seminary.
I don't doubt that, because the communists always can tell where the weak entry is to get to it, or to infiltrate an organization. Yeah. And that this is how they sized up the church, which was a lot more difficult to infiltrate than the Protestant churches. Like, I mean, the National Council of Churches, outright communist front.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question. The head minister at that church, I think his name was Ward, something Ward. They called him Red Ward. I mean, he was an outright commie. They were like total. I mean, John Starmer in his book None Dare Call It Treason did a good job of writing about them. But the Catholic Church,
you appreciate what a phenomenal achievement that book was coming
Incredible.
out in I believe, 64. The
Yeah.
guy self-published a book. No internet, no nothing back
And he
then.
sold millions
So
of copies.
yeah, 7
And
million copies of a self-published book.
yeah. And by the way, all he did was clippings from the mainstream media.
Yeah, yeah.
He just knew how to dig. He would, I mean, the New York Times, for example, they will tell you these things, but they bury it into the story so nobody finds it. But you have to look, and this is what he did. He got clippings and he put together this book using their own words.
Right.
They usually ultimately will tell you what's going on. It's just that they do it. They don't think anyone's going to notice. But he taught. I mean, he also points out that the Catholic Church was not infiltrated because it had a strong hierarchical organization, a pyramidal organization that was not so easy to pierce. And there was talk about maybe the Masons getting a foothold. I don't know. I've heard Dr. E. Michael Jones talk about it, and he's probably right. This guy Malachi Martin was a change agent who got in there, a couple of other people. But even so, it still doesn't corrupt the entire edifice. I think that the Catholic Church continues to be this incredible pillar of strength. It's really ultimately uncorruptible simply because of the way it's set up. It's not, it's like attacking this fortress that is so impregnable that, you might get a couple of people in there, but they're not going to really go in and get too far. At least that's the way it seems.
Jesus himself promised that the gates of hell would not prevail over it.
Yeah.
But certainly, when you get to the hierarchy, there must be all kinds of demonic forces at work to try to turn these guys who are high up. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think they expect that. I mean, didn't Jesus himself go into hell and battle with Satan? I mean, and what came out, right? I mean, so that's that's what the church kind of represents. I think. I hope. Anyways,
speaking of all that, how's Maura Healey?
Oh my God! I mean, this. I've talked about the scandal around Michelle Wu. I think that she's vulnerable. The Globe is not going to publish anything about it. She was set up in her office with a huge amount of money coming from this Chinese businessman with direct connections to the CCP. And by the way, the CCP set up other people around the United States as well. She's not the only one. They are using influence and money to buy politicians. Nothing new, but it's a huge scandal. And the Globe is not going to publish it. One person asked her about it, and she said, "Oh, to talk about that's racist." Right.
Oh, of course. Well, yeah.
That's all she had to say about it. But I think that it's trickling out there. This is anecdotal, but her opponent is Josh Kraft, Bob Kraft's son.
Right.
Not a bad guy. Not the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but who am I to criticize? He's and he's liberal, but he's not. He's also tuned into like he wants to do what's good for Boston. I thought I really am very proud of him for answering a question when he was asked, well, are you going to work with the Trump administration? And his answer was, he didn't say yes, but he said, look, I'll work with anybody who's doing things that are going to be good for Boston. I'm going to put Boston first. I thought that was a pretty good answer for a liberal Democrat, and it kind of tipped things off here. Whereas she's like spending $650,000 out of the city coffers to go to Washington when she had to testify so that she could have a bunch of hacks prepare her to do that testifying, in which she completely lied about just about everything. But she had all these fancy ways. You know how they're doing that in Congress. They'll talk about something else. And she, of course, when she was finished with that testimony, the Boston Globe, oh my God, you'd think that she had delivered the Sermon on the Mount. This is so brilliant. And look at it, brilliant, brilliant, like they used to do for Dukakis. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Oh.
And
I've got to switch off early, but I do appreciate, as a Catholic, your support and interest in our little organization. And
as I said, the whole world has a lot at stake with the direction of the Catholic Church. It really does. And I hope that it at least maintains its traditions and a general conservative direction. I don't expect, miracles, but I understand that there's a liberal establishment, and maybe the church has to bend a little bit in that direction. But I hope that things improve. I mean, that's all I can say.
Well, I'm hoping that it will, and maybe by this time next week we'll have a better idea.
We will. All right, Mike.
Have a wonderful evening.
Yep. And, thank you. Thanks as always. All right. Okay, you bet. Thanks a lot. All right, so that was Michael D. Shaw. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Check out my books. They're all available at Amazon.com, Charles Moscowitz, and onward and upward. God bless America. God bless President Trump.